All right, ready to dive in. Today we're looking at John Locke's Two Treatises of Government.
A text that's, well, hugely influential in political thought even today.
For this deep dive, you gave me a 1988 student edition, right?
Yes, edited by Peter Laslett. It's from the Cambridge Text in the History of Political Thought series.
Okay, cool. So before we even get to Locke's ideas, I gotta ask, the book's publication, it wasn't straightforward, was it?
It wasn't. Locke was very, very particular about how his book was printed. He left all sorts of instructions for the publisher.
Sounds like he really wanted to get it right, huh?
Absolutely. But even with all his effort, early printings, they had errors, alterations.
Oh no, that's gotta be frustrating, putting all that work into something so groundbreaking and then mistakes.
It's a shame, really. Locke was so upset he wanted the whole first edition scrapped,
Wow.
a more accurate edition.
Wow.
It didn't come out until almost 40 years after he died.
So it took that long to get his real vision out there.
It did. They used his personal copy, the one with his handwritten corrections.
Makes you appreciate those scholars who make sure we get the best versions of these texts.
Crucial work, yeah. Passing these ideas on to future generations.
Okay, let's get into the two treatises. So the first one, it's basically Locke responding to Robert Filmer's Patriarcha. That book's all about the divine right of kings, absolute monarchy. Did Locke just disagree with that?
More the disagree. He, totally dismantles it.
Really?
This idea that political power came from God, passed down through a father-to-son line, Locke refuted it completely.
That's pretty bold for the time.
Oh, it was revolutionary, challenging the whole basis of power as everyone knew it.
So Locke wasn't just suggesting something different. He was attacking the core of how people thought about authority.
Exactly. And then in the second treatise, he lays out his own system, natural rights, individual liberty, the social contract, the right of revolution.
Yeah, those are, well, we still talk about this today.
They're that fundamental. And one thing Laslett points out, Locke's connection to the first Earl of Shaftesbury, a bigwig politician. Shaftesbury was Locke's patron.
Okay, for those of us not up on our 17th century English politics, what's a Whig exactly?
Good point. Context is key. So the Whigs, they were opposed to the monarchy, basically.
Wanted to limit the king's power.
Yeah, give more power to Parliament.
Yeah.
They were all about individual liberties, too. Shaftesbury, being a top Whig, very powerful, very influential.
So having him as a patron, Locke must have been right in the middle of all the political hot topics.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Laslett argues Locke's work wasn't just theory, ideas floating around. It was connected to what was happening politically, especially the exclusion crisis in the 1680s.
Exclusion crisis?
It was all about who'd be king after Charles II. The Whigs wanted to block his brother James from the throne because James was Catholic.
So this was real for Locke, not just abstract ideas.
Exactly. Intense political maneuvering going on, and he was involved. Makes you wonder how much it shaped his thinking. Power, limits on government, the right to challenge unjust rule.
Adds a whole layer to how we read his work. Okay, so some key takeaways from the two treatises. Locke says political power comes from the people, not from some king appointed by God.
Right. Huge idea, really. Basis of modern democracy.
And people are born with inherent rights. He focuses on liberty and property rights.
Right. He saw those as fundamental, can't be taken away.
So for Locke, we're not just subjects. We have these rights no ruler can touch.
Exactly. And that leads into his social contract idea. People agree to be governed. They give up some freedom.
Yeah.
But in exchange for protection of their rights and for the common good.
Like a give and take. We give up a little to get the security of living in a society.
Exactly. But it's not just blind obedience. Locke says if the government breaks its side of the deal, if it tramples on those rights, acts like a tyrant, the people have a right to revolt.
That's pretty radical, even for now.
It was. Shows how important individual liberty and limited government were to him. Ultimately, power should be with the people, and they have a right to resist tyranny.
His ideas, they're obviously important, but what are some things from the two treatises that really make those ideas come alive?
Well, one thing that stands out, Locke uses Bible passages to argue against absolute monarchy.
So he's using their own arguments against them. Clever.
Super clever. To challenge the whole worldview, he had to engage with the very sources they used to justify it.
Makes you think about how carefully he put everything together. Not just opinions, but a real argument, step by step.
Right. And it's not just the Bible. He brings in history, natural law, reason to support individual liberty and limits on government.
Shows how much his work was part of a larger conversation, all these ideas and perspectives swirling around.
Absolutely. And it's in that context that his ideas about natural rights, the social contract, the right of revolution, they become even more significant.
Okay, so we've got the background of the two treatises, Locke's relationship with Shaftesbury, and some key concepts. Anything else we need before really getting into the arguments?
One more thing, and it's important. While Locke's a champion of liberty, his view of those natural rights, that freedom, it wasn't universal.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, this is the 17th century, right? His ideas were radical, but still shaped by the hierarchies of the time.
Yeah.
Like property rights. Groundbreaking. But it assumed a system where not everyone could own property. Women, enslaved people.
So even groundbreaking ideas can be limited by their time.
Absolutely. It reminds us when we study these historical figures, we got to see the whole picture. Contributions and limitations.
This feels like a good spot to pause. We've got the groundwork laid, the context, some of Locke's big ideas.
Yeah, great foundation.
When we come back, let's dig into those arguments, see how they work and how they've affected the world we live in.
Welcome back, everyone. We're deep in John Locke's two treatises of government. We've talked about the historical context, some of his big ideas. Now, I'm ready to get into his actual arguments.
Sounds good. Always interesting to see how these ideas are actually presented, defended. One thing that really struck me, Locke using Bible passages to argue against absolute monarchy. It's like fighting fire with fire, you know?
It was strategic, for sure. To challenge the whole worldview at the time, he had to use the same sources they used to justify it.
Can you give me an example how he actually did that?
Okay, so in the first treatise, Locke tackles this idea that monarchs get their authority from Adam. You know, God gave Adam dominion over the earth. Filmer, this guy arguing for absolute monarchy, used that to say kings have absolute power.
So, what does Locke do with that?
He goes through the Bible text carefully and says, hold on, Adam's dominion. It wasn't political. It was about stewardship of nature, not ruling over other people.
Ah, subtle but important difference.
Right. By really breaking down the text, he takes away the basis of Filmer's whole argument.
It's like he's saying, okay, you want to use the Bible, then be ready to defend every interpretation.
Exactly. Makes them confront the problems in their own logic.
Smart move. Shows how Locke built his arguments, too. Not just random opinions, but step by step, using their own tools.
Yeah. And it's not just the Bible. He uses history, natural law, reason, all to back up his arguments for individual liberty, limited government.
It's a good reminder. Locke wasn't writing in a vacuum, part of this bigger intellectual world, pulling in all these different ideas.
Right. And in that context, his ideas about natural rights, the social contract, the right to revolt, they become even more important.
Let's get into those more. We touched on them, but I want to see how Locke actually explains them in the two treatises.
Okay, sure. So, natural rights. This is core to Locke's whole philosophy. He says people are born with inherent rights to life, liberty, property, not given by any government, ruler. It's just part of being human.
So before any political system even exists, those rights are already there.
Exactly. They come before government and no authority can take them away.
Seems basic to us now, but back then, that was revolutionary, wasn't it?
Totally. Challenging the whole idea of absolute power. Yeah. Saying each person has this inherent worth, this autonomy.
Okay, we've got these rights, but how do we go from individuals to a whole society? That's where the social contract comes in.
Right. Locke says people. They see the benefits of living together, so they agree to give up some of their absolute freedom. In exchange, they get protection of their rights and the common good, you know, things that benefit everyone.
It's a trade, a little bit of freedom for security, a system where our rights are protected.
I like that, yeah. And this idea of consent.
Yeah.
It's huge for Locke. Legitimate government has to come from the consent of the people it governs.
That's modern democracy right there.
It is. So different from the idea that power comes from God, or you inherit it.
But what if the government breaks its promise, starts messing with those rights, acting like a tyrant?
That's where the right of revolution comes in. If a government becomes oppressive, violates those basic rights, the people can resist, even overthrow it.
Whoa, that's a big statement. Sounds kind of anarchist.
Not really. Locke wasn't saying we should be in constant revolt or reject all authority. He saw it as a last resort, a way to protect against tyranny, make sure the government answers to the people.
Like an emergency brake on a car, to stop things from going too far.
Perfect analogy. And he said this right wasn't something to be taken lightly, only for extreme cases when you've tried everything else.
Right. Not just because you disagree with a policy or something?
It was about those fundamental rights, preventing tyranny, not about chaos.
Okay, so natural rights, Social contract, right of revolution, all tied together, forming Locke's main ideas about politics. But what did he think a government should actually look like?
Well, he definitely liked limited government. He was suspicious of too much power in one place, thought it was dangerous for individual liberty.
So no fans of kings then?
Nope, not at all. He thought absolute power always leads to corruption. So the government has to be set up so no one person, no group can get too much power.
Okay, so what did limited government look like to him? Any specific ideas?
Oh, yeah. He loved the idea of separation of powers. Divide government authority into different branches.
Checks and balances.
That's it. He said, when you split power up, you create a system where each branch keeps the others in check. No one branch gets too strong.
Sounds like the system we have now, right? Legislative, executive, judicial branches.
Exactly. You can see Locke's influence all over modern democracies, each branch with its own job, able to limit the others. So the legislature makes laws, the executive enforces them, the judiciary interprets them.
Makes sense. Keeps things balanced.
Right. And remember, Locke wasn't just coming up with theories. He was involved in real politics, even helped write constitutions for colonies in America.
So he was putting his ideas into practice. Wow.
He was. Shows he wasn't just an armchair philosopher. He wanted to make a better society using these ideas.
Really highlights the practical side of his work. Writing about concepts is one thing, but trying to actually make them happen.
It's a whole other level. And I think that's part of why Locke's work is still relevant. Deep philosophical ideas, but also connected to real politics.
As we're talking, I can't help but think these ideas, they're still relevant today, right? We still argue about how much power the government should have, how to balance individual freedom with the common good, how to hold our leaders accountable.
Absolutely. Locke's work. It's not just history. It's a living thing, still shaping how we think about politics, about the relationship between each person and the state.
Amazing, isn't it? Ideas from over 300 years ago still affecting us now.
Shows how powerful his thinking was. And we've only just scratched the surface, really. There's so much more to explore, especially how his ideas have been interpreted, debated, changed over time.
It's not just what Locke wrote, but how those ideas have resonated, evolved.
Exactly. It's a process, and that's what makes studying his work so fascinating.
We definitely have more to talk about. But for now, let's recap. We covered Locke using the Bible in his arguments, his ideas of natural rights, the social contract, the right of revolution, his vision for limited government, separation of powers.
And we touched on how he was involved in real-world politics, drafting constitutions, really committed to putting these ideas into action.
Okay, great. Now, I'm curious, Locke's other big work, an essay concerning human understanding, how does that's about philosophy, the mind. How does that connect to his political theories? That's a big jump, though, right? From politics to, like, the workings of the mind.
It seems that way, yeah. But there's actually this really cool link between Locke's philosophy and his political ideas.
Okay, you've got my attention. How do those two things go together?
So in the essay concerning human understanding, Locke's big argument is, we're born as blank slates. Tabula rasa, he calls it. It's Latin. He's saying we don't have innate ideas. Everything we know comes from experience.
So not born with, like, pre-programmed ideas, but we learn about the world through what we see, what we experience.
Exactly. And that focus on experience, individual learning, it has huge implications for how Locke sees the role of government.
I think I see where this is going. If knowledge isn't built in, if we have to learn it ourselves, then people need the freedom to do that, right? To explore, to question.
Exactly. It wouldn't make sense to argue for individual liberty, self-government, if you thought people were just born knowing everything about the world and their place in it.
Makes sense. It's like Locke's theory of knowledge is the foundation for his political beliefs.
It's a pretty neat connection. This idea that we shape our own understanding of the world lines up perfectly with his ideas about limited government, letting individuals be autonomous.
So if Locke thinks all knowledge comes from experience, what does that mean for education?
Great question. He actually wrote a lot about education. He thought it should focus on practical skills, critical thinking, being exposed to different ideas.
That's pretty modern, actually, like the stuff we value now learning by doing, not just memorizing facts.
He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He wanted education to help people think for themselves, question authority, really engage in discussion and debate.
Makes me think of how he used the Bible to argue against absolute monarchy. That's critical thinking right there.
Absolutely. He wasn't afraid to challenge the accepted way of thinking, even about religion.
So as we wrap this up, It's clear that the two treatises and the essay, they're not just separate things, they're part of this whole system of thought. Locke's philosophy feeds into his political ideas.
Yeah. And it's that combo deep philosophy and real-world politics that makes his work so interesting, even all these centuries later.
Natural rights, individual liberty, limited government, the right of revolution. His ideas have had such a huge impact on how we think about politics.
And like we said, his emphasis on experience, on critical thinking,
Yeah.
that's still relevant today. Think about education, free speech, the role of government.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. What's the one big takeaway you want listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is, Locke's work isn't just history. It still speaks to us today. It challenges us to think about the relationship between the individual and the state, about power, about what makes a just society.
It's true. His ideas are still so relevant, make you think. They push us to keep having these conversations about the principles that shape our world, our responsibilities as individuals and citizens.
And as we deal with all the complexities of the 21st century, technology, inequality, political division, Locke's focus on reason, individual rights, the importance of consent, it gives us a way to approach these challenges.
It reminds us that pursuing knowledge, defending liberty, having these thoughtful conversations, they're not just nice ideas, they're crucial for a good, fair society.
Exactly. And as Locke said, reading. It gives your mind the materials for knowledge, but it's thinking that makes what you read truly yours. So as you explore Locke's work, keep thinking critically.
Have those discussions, those debates, and most importantly, take those lessons and apply them to the world around you, to the challenges we face.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and never underestimate the power of ideas.